of the Littleton City Planning Commission in order. Welcome. Those of you who actually give us an audience for a change, instead of just depending on the viewers at home. I'm saying welcome now regardless of how the evening goes. Doreen, would you like to call the roll, please?
Commissioner Bockenstead.
Here.
Commissioner Brown.
Here.
Commissioner Coronado. Commissioner Iteria.
Here.
Commissioner Newfinke. Here. Commissioner Metcalf.
Here.
Commissioner Reimer. Commissioner Samuelson. Commissioner Stavropoulos.
Here. Okay, thank you. We do have a quorum with 6 members present. Next item on the agenda is minutes and the agenda. Do any of the commissioners have any adjustments, changes to the agenda to propose? Okay, hearing none. I notice we don't have minutes from a regular meeting from 2 weeks ago. We'll do that next meeting. Okay. As I recall, there was a stimulating and active discussion on election of officers. So, okay, general business. We do have an ordinance proposed for the city of Littleton. Suzanne, you want to give us a brief intro, or Jan? I'm sorry, I totally brought you off on that.
No, this was a referral from the City Council to the Planning Commission. From Tuesday night's meeting, there was a citizen who spoke at public invited to be heard regarding beekeeping, and this was a result of, I think, a code enforcement action. City Council wanted a pretty immediate review of the current practice and a proposed ordinance to allow beekeeping, and they wanted that brought forward in May. The result of that was it had to be heard at tonight's Planning Commission meeting, as your next meeting is a public forum. So that's why the rush to get it here. They want it on the agenda for first reading on May 5th. So this ordinance is actually pretty much almost verbatim. There are a few changes, but we took it out of Aurora's zoning code. It's actually in Aurora's animal code. We went ahead and left it in the zoning code here. When this came up in Aurora, I can't remember if it was 5 or 6 years ago, the beekeeping was similar to what Littleton had at the time, which was to allow it in agriculture districts, and I think it was defined as livestock in Aurora as well. And after much negotiation with the beekeeper organizations and the people who wanted to keep bees within the city of Aurora, they came up with and passed this ordinance. We changed it a little bit. You see in the highlights, we've specified which zones it's allowed within. We also specified, I don't know if that remained in, but that it was prohibited in any multifamily residential. That was an addition. Other than that, it's pretty similar. They haven't had any enforcement problems out in Aurora, and it's been their experience that the beekeepers actually like to see a lot of regulations placed on beekeeping to ensure that it's done properly. And I remember when we negotiated this one, they were actually the proponents of many of these restrictions. So that being said, I think there's somebody from one of the organizations here tonight to do a presentation.
That would be good.
So I don't know how you want to take that. I think you probably need to, since this is not a public hearing, I don't know, Dennis, you scheduled it, so we don't need to suspend the rules. We can just go ahead. So.
Okay, I know everyone did get a copy of the amended version, so we got that, as well as the, I presume, Jan, that the staff report essentially is unchanged.
Yeah, except I did notice that I had an error in there today. And under background, I accidentally included the RE district as one of those agriculture districts, and that should have been omitted.
Okay.
RE presently does not allow livestock other than forest for 25,000 square feet.
So we'll strike the RE
yeah, strike
reference.
the RE.
Okay. I think we can take this fairly simply. We do have someone here to speak on behalf of the ordinance. We can do that. Hearing no objection from the rest of the commission, I think we can go right to public comment from that, from there, and then discuss the issue, assuming we get a motion presenting the ordinance for consideration. If that's acceptable, if you'd like to step up, we even have an extra microphone.
Well,
Oh, is that one?
I was wondering if I could use your projection setup. I have a flash drive, and it's a 13-slide presentation.
We didn't set it up tonight, I'm sorry, I didn't realize you were going to do
I
that.
have a projector.
Oh, you do? Okay.
I do. I have
Okay.
the whole setup if you'd allow me to plug in. It would.
Sure.
It won't take that long. 2 of them are pictures.
Okay, yeah.
No objections? Yes, please do so.
Okay.
For the record, Craig's
Mr.
here.
Chairman, while she's doing that, can I ask a couple of questions of our city attorney?
Right, we're not rigid on the process here.
Quick question on the zoning categories that are allowed. If MH is manufactured housing, is it not?
Yes, what I did is I added every zone district on here other than the PD districts. These are all the straight zone districts that are on that land use table.
I guess the question that I have, and I don't have enough knowledge of the individual zoning districts, but trying to figure out the pertinency of having it in a manufactured housing versus, well, not versus anything, just in that particular one. I question that. You have a T zoning, which is isn't that the T?
Oh, that's a transition zone.
Transition zone.
You can have single-family lots in that zone district, so.
That'd be a question for Suzanne, right?
But manufactured,
Homes.
yes, is that a subdivision or a park?
That's a zone district.
I know, but I don't know enough about it.
You don't have anything zoned that. That is a zone district in our.
I guess I was wondering if it's not pertinent, then why would we put it in there?
Well, I didn't initially draft it to include zone districts.
No, I understand.
Yeah, I mean, I think you could probably take that out if you wanted to and allow it in every zone district except multifamily, based on lot size. But if you're going to allow them everywhere else, presumably if manufactured housing, if you have one on you could have a manufactured home on a half acre.
If I may, Suzanne, we do have within the body of the ordinance requirements as far as flyways and approach heights, screening, proximity to and how it faces adjoining properties. So presumably, regardless of the individual zoning district, unless they can comply with these other requirements, including water, on-site, and that sort of thing.
Yeah, there it is. It's just permitted, but subject to these regulations.
I have one other question then, assuming that that's all okay. When you have, under your livestock definition, you read it all, and I guess I had a problem when I first read this. You go through the entire, and it says and these, and that's been crossed over.
Right.
Are you now saying that you don't want to see it designated as livestock?
I don't, because if you designate it as livestock, then we have to go back through all these zone districts and where livestock's not allowed.
I see.
Then we have to allow it as a permitted use for beef.
Okay, I didn't
It
make
just
the-
gets really
I
convoluted.
didn't make the connection based upon what I read.
Oh, okay. So I just took it out of livestock and regulated it separately.
Okay, thank you.
Just to avoid any potential conflict in interpretation.
Right, because otherwise you're going to have livestock allowed and not allowed in certain zones. We're going to have to go back through all those zones and put an asterisk or something.
Got it.
You'll need a flyway for your cows. I have a couple of questions as well. One is in section 2 where you permitted as an accessory use in all the following zoning districts. Does that mean that any homeowner in those districts, zoning districts, will require a permit?
No, it just means that there has to be somebody living there for it to be
Okay.
accessory to
All
the
right.
use.
Okay. And then the other question, just for clarification, are we not required to hold a public hearing when we're doing a zoning ordinance change?
No. Jan,
No, I-
double checked.
Yeah, I checked a section of the city code, that I quoted kind of here in your staff report. Didn't say anything specified that a public hearing had to be.
So since you're simply making a recommendation, and this is not quasi-judicial, this is legislative, you can simply do that by motion.
So we're really recommending to the city council that they adopt it rather than passing it ourselves.
Right.
I've got the question for Suzanne on the idea that presumably they're going to be manufacturing honey. Is basic, the idea of having the bees in the first place. Does that affect any of the manufacturing zonings that, I see like 1351, it says animal products and byproducts are only, the manufacturing is only allowed in the industrial zones?
No, this wouldn't fall under manufacturing of that sort. I mean, really, I think you'll probably hear that most of them are kept more for pollination and as a hobby, and I'm not sure the honey is really, I mean, if they were to sell it or something, we'd have to look at it as a home business, but I don't think they produce that much honey. It's not really the purpose of the beekeeping, I don't believe. So that's more for actually, I think, like a meat packing plant or something like that.
So if someone were to have sufficient colonies, given the size of their property, that they could produce enough honey for sale, it would really fall under the sales restrictions rather than manufacturing?
Yeah, I wouldn't consider it manufacturing.
I mean, it's not different than canning your own jelly.
Yeah. Jan says it's like canning your own jelly. You grow the...
Given the freezes we've had this year, we're not going to have a lot of fruit. Just my wife's opinion. Okay, I think we're ready. Just for the record, we'll note that Craig did get here just a couple minutes behind the roll call, but I'm glad you could make it. That gives us a full list, 7 people. Okay, I'm sorry, if you could tell us your name, address, that sort of thing.
Okay. My name is Jo Haugland, and I'm president of the Highland Beekeeping Club, and I have Liz Wickard here with me. She's the vice president. And I live at 6547 Willow Broom Trail, Littleton, Colorado. And in our club, we have over 300 members, and they range from Cheyenne, Wyoming, down to Colorado Springs. And we're also affiliated with Lockheed Martin's Beekeeping Club and the Northern Colorado Beekeepers Association. And we're here today just to tell you a little bit about reasons why it would be a really good idea to have bees in the backyard here in Littleton. And so with that, we'll go ahead. Why should the ordinance be changed? Well, we want to be legal. We don't want to be outlaws and criminals anymore. Bees are already in the city of Littleton, whether you know it or not. There's bees along the South Platte. There's bees along the High Line. Our beekeepers remove many swarms for free every year. And the bees are also having trouble surviving right now with colony collapse disorder, varroa mites, tracheal mites, hive beetles, and other diseases. They're having problems and they need our help to survive. We have a history of beekeeping here in Colorado. In fact, in Littleton at one time, there were vast amounts of beehives out here, and it was said that the alfalfa grown here was one of the best forage for bees that there was. Bees were brought over here from Europe. They're not native here, but they were brought over here to pollinate foods that were brought from Europe that are also not native here. And so the foods that we're accustomed to eating, approximately 1/3 of the U.S. food supply is pollinated by bees, and we must have bees in order to continue that food source. Commercial bees are finding 80% die-off of bees per year now, and backyard hive keepers are finding a much lesser rate, about 27 to 30% at this time, and it's because we don't stress the bees as much as the commercial beekeepers do. Bees are necessary for pollinating, and bees produce a bunch of byproducts used by human beings, including honey, pollen, beeswax, royal jelly, propolis, and the venom, which is actually used for medical conditions. Who would benefit from such an ordinance change? Well, the bees would. They'd be given an upper hand in their fight against all the ailments they have. Gardeners would see improvement in their flowers and vegetables. Beekeepers could practice legally instead of practicing in the closet like a number of them do now. Individuals that use bee venom for therapy could keep their treatments close to home. We have one club member in Englewood that we have outfitted with 2 hives. It's legal to keep a hobby hive in the backyard, and she keeps 2 small hives so that she can treat herself for MS. Her MS is now in remission. Public sentiment could be changed regarding honeybees. There's a lot of confusion. People don't know the difference between a hornet, a wasp, a yellow jacket, and education could be given. We do a lot of seminars for community groups, gardening groups, Boy Scouts, etc. And Littleton would become a greener place to live. More benefits to the community. Local produce and farmers market items would increase. Beekeepers would be more willing to come out and collect any feral colonies at no charge to local residents. We continue to provide education to schools and other community groups. And again, Littleton would be touted as the place to live, having a very green attitude. We fear what we don't understand. In fact, my mentor, Jerry Webb, is fond of telling people how more people are killed by being hit in the head with a golf ball than they are by bee stings. Beekeepers specially select bee species for their gentleness. There are no Africanized bees in Colorado. The general populace does not know the difference between yellow jackets, bumblebees, hornets, and wasps, but they can be educated. Less than 1% of the human population is truly allergic to bee stings. Less than 5% of stings treated in hospitals are from honeybees, but rather the wasps and hornets. And people sting themselves intentionally to treat a variety of ailments, including fibromyalgia, tumors, cancers, tendinitis, arthritis, and more. Beekeeping is not something that people take lightly. They are perpetual students. They take their study and education seriously. Classes are taken, experts are consulted, multiple books are read, and we always are trying different tending techniques. Beekeepers are supported when they start out and are offered mentoring. Extensive training is available through college courses. Monthly meetings have ongoing education, and beekeeping groups collaborate and trade information between themselves. Beekeeping is a craft. Unlike buying other pets, you don't just wake up one day and say, oh, I think I'll beekeep now, and go home and start the practice. It doesn't work that way. And in fact, I think it would be a lot better if some of the pet owners that I know of would take their ownership as seriously as we do. Prior education and preparation is necessary. There are apprenticeship beekeeper and master beekeeping programs. Expensive, and I must emphasize, expensive equipment is purchased, prepared, and set up in order to receive bees. Bees can only be purchased in the spring and have to be ordered months in advance of their arrival. And beekeepers must medicate their bees either naturally or chemically to keep them healthy. And they have to be trained or educated in the use of these medicines. And some beekeepers even have to test for pesticide handlers' licenses. Beekeeping is a science. We use our apiaries to provide data for global resources regarding mite infestations, hive beetles, colony collapse, and other problems that bees are having right now. We supply our data to researchers that are counting the population decreases. Beekeepers themselves seek out, discover, and invent treatments for their hives, for their beekeeping problems. Some master beekeeper courses that are taken are actually more difficult to complete than master and doctoral courses in other disciplines. Beekeepers, especially in Europe, if they have an issue with keepers and can't get enough support from the government, that's what we do, is we protest and we ask for research. Right now, the White House is offering up some money for beekeeping research, as they know that our agriculture is in dire straits without having enough bees to pollinate the crops. Beekeepers are concerned with public safety, beekeeping practices, and the survival of the indicator species, bees Apis mellifera. Based on the ordinance that Littleton is considering for Aurora, we totally agree with it. It's a good ordinance. A couple of things that I don't know may or may not need clarification according to some, but they're defining all things in all stages of life as a bee, and it's my opinion that maybe that it should be clarified in that they've described eggs, larvae, and pupa as something that's going to be described as bees, and I don't think that that's necessarily a concern for most people. Nobody's ever stung by a larva or an egg, and so maybe we would want to just specify adult honeybees. The section that specifies densities for the city of Aurora, again, it's fine. My question is this. Specifying the number of hives, and let's say something up to maybe 4 hives in a backyard, is sort of an arbitrary number. And the reason I say that is because I'm guessing they're limiting the number of hives based on how many bees that they think are in there. And I can tell you right now, I have 30 beehives out in the Roxborough area on a rural community road out there. And about 1/3 of my hives have half population right now. Bees aren't out in the wintertime. Their population decreases in the wintertime. If you've got a weak or a sick hive, you may have a full standing hive there, and it only may have 2 frames that have bees on it. Sometimes when we collect swarms, they're very small. One swarm I collected one time was the size of a tennis ball, and I put it in a smaller hive known as a nuke. But it's my suggestion that a backyard apiary could easily sustain a number of small hives, including a top bar hive, which is mainly kept for pollination purposes. I recommend that at least 4 beehives be allowed in the backyard to accommodate certain situations, such as suppose a beekeeper picked up a swarm along the Highline Canal that was in the way of a bike path, which has been done many times. We need a place to put those rescued bees. We need a place to nurture those bees and to help them grow until they're strong enough to be put into a hive somewhere else. And the reason for this is bees are like anybody else. They want the easy way of getting stuff, and sometimes when you have a smaller, weaker colony, if it's in with a number of other colonies, they'll take their food away. They'll go, you can't defend yourselves, we're coming in to get it. And so sometimes I have had a colony on my front porch that's only got 2 frames in it, and I had to move it out of my yard because they were taking all their food away. And so there are instances where it would be nice to have, even if you only had 2 hives in your backyard, it would be nice to have a couple of extra hives back there for this type of scenario. So I don't think that by saying, well, you can only have 2 hives in your backyard if you have a 1/4 of an acre, I don't really think that correlates to the number of bees that are in it. There could only be 2 frames in it. And each hive, if it's fully populated, would have 18 to 20 frames in it. So there's a little bit of a discrepancy there. The Highland Beekeeping Club and the 300 members that run from Cheyenne, Wyoming down to Colorado Springs would like to make the recommendation for the change in ordinance in support of backyard beekeeping. We want to allow the honeybees and their products in the backyards. It'll boost the local economy, will allow us to provide further data to researchers. Honeybees are gentle, they're industrious, they produce products that we can use, and they're already here. They're already in Littleton. You have beehives at Hudson Gardens. You have beehives right over here at the Denver Botanic Gardens at Chatfield. You have them at the Littleton Historic Museum. They have a 3 to 5 mile flying radius around their hive. They don't recognize zoning boundaries. Littleton Historic Museum, even though they're having problems with their bees right now, is in the middle of a residential neighborhood. And I doubt very seriously that you've had one complaint about the bees in that area. So they're here, and they're going to be here, whether they're in the backyard or whether they're wild. Honeybees are needed for pollination, and not just for the U.S. food supply, but for your gardens. I can't tell you how many people we have heard that say, I haven't seen a honeybee in my yard for years. Beekeepers would no longer be criminals. Trust me, we don't want to be criminals. We'd like to proudly practice what we do in public, and we'd like to educate our neighbors. We can't tell you how many people we have coming over. Can we see the bees? Can our kids see your bees? Can you come to our school? Can you do a talk? Almost every beekeeper that's sitting here has had the same experience. Littleton ordinance changed to support backyard beekeeping should be changed in favor of the bees and of their maintenance so that they can survive. So please help the honeybees, the beekeepers, and the community and your environment by allowing the bees into the backyard. Yes, sir.
I have a couple of questions. First question deals with the difference between the definition of a hive and a colony.
A hive is a structure that bees live in. A colony is a group of bees.
Then let me go back to the first question. What does a hive consist of? I understand it's a structure, but it doesn't tell me how tall it is, how wide it is, things
There
I
are
don't know.
specified measurements for a hive, and it's based on a typical Langstroth hive. And Jerry Webb could probably tell you the dimensions because he's probably built 3,000 of them. But they consist of a bottom board, 2 deep supers with 9 to 10 frames apiece in them, an inner cover, and a roof.
Okay. I guess I'm still trying to come up with a 3-dimensional type of structure.
Jerry,
Size?
I'd be happy to answer your
If you
question.
could go up to the microphone.
You're going to find out I'm hard of hearing.
That's okay, so am I.
Or you can use that one.
But this is a mic.
They want your name and address, Jerry?
Yeah, thank you. My name is Jerry Webb. I live at 9684 West Sunbeam Avenue, Littleton, just off of Titan Road. Been out there 34 years. And we just finished selling our bee supply business. We had it for 25 years out there. Can I give you a little more background before I answer your question?
Go for it.
Okay.
Sure.
Been a beekeeper for about 40 years, and I think my name is on every one of your people's lists around here, all the fire department, police department, county agents. Everybody calls me. If a citizen calls in and they've got a swarm of bees hanging on a tree limb and they're panicked, and we are very happy to come pick those up or refer them to Jo and her club and other people, and we do it for free. Now, you consider what our costs are coming in and doing that, and a lot of times a swarm, when it's hanging on a tree limb, it's just resting there. And we'll drive 15, 20 miles to come in and pick up that swarm, and all of a sudden they take off. Because when they cluster together like that, they send out scouts looking for a possible new home, and then if they find something, they all take off. So we missed out, but we still don't charge anyone for it. Now, we do a lot of classes in grade schools and high schools, and Highlands Ranch High School. I talk with them every year. We really love to talk to young people. 3-foot people are the best people in the world, with no front teeth, because they really listen. Your question about the size of a hive, it's about this long, about that wide, and about this tall.
And that's approximately 2 feet by,
2 by a foot and a half by maybe 3 feet tall. That's a basic hive. As summer progresses and we get more and more flowers, the bees bring in surplus honey. And then we put more boxes on top of that. Anything they put up there, we get to keep. and we only harvest once a year in September. Someone had a question a while ago about selling honey. Most of the honey that backyard beekeepers collect is used for gifts, and some bartering might go on, but I know we give all our relatives beeswax candles and a jar of honey, and they won't burn the candles, but we warn them, you're going to get them next year, so you better do it. But if you have any other questions, I'd be real happy to answer them for you. Yes, sir.
In the definition section, again, it says here that a colony shall mean a hive and equipment and appurtenances, including the bees, the comb, the honey, the pollen, and the brood. I guess my question to you is, because the regulation itself refers to if you have a quarter of an acre or less, you can have 2 colonies. And I guess I'm trying to figure out, based on your definition of a hive, would you consider that this 2 by 1.5 by 3 equals 1 colony or 1 hive?
Same thing.
Same thing. Well, that's the clarification I need, because we have 2 separate definitions and they're not very well connected.
We have a very distinct lingo. We talk about weird things like royal jelly and propolis and parthenogenesis. There's a whole bunch of things that go along with that. Can I answer any other questions that any of you might have?
Mr. Chair, I have a couple of questions. One is, and that unfortunately, well, Jan, you may be able to come into that, may be a legal question. As I read the definition, the current ordinance as it reads, or the suggested language, says that 1/4 acre or less lot in size can have up to 2 colonies. But there is no restriction on the number of hives that can be in any lot, just simply in the number of, so there could be 4 hives as long as no more than 2 of them are occupied by a colony.
So the other 2 would have to be empty.
Yes, I'm just, as I read the language right now, it would permit additional empty hives as long as there's no more than 2 colonies.
But there's no point in having 4 hives because a colony resides in a hive.
And the reason why I'm asking that is because you discussed possibility of having to bring in an emergency, which I would understand that to be that you would have some hives that may be unpopulated and on standby.
And as soon as we put a colony of bees in there, then we would have 3 colonies.
I understand that, but that's why I want to have the clarification. My follow-up question with you is when you talk about emergency situations, how long are those emergency hives kept?
It depends. If it's a very small swarm and you need to bring it up to big enough size so that you can put it out with the big boys and they're not going to be attacked, it could take a month or more.
Okay.
If you have a very small colony, that you've picked up as a swarm, let's say it's the size of a tennis ball, it could take it all summer before it's big enough to leave. It may not even make it through the winter. It just depends on how hardworking they are and how fast they can draw the comb out to lay brood and to catch up with the rest of the group. So the time could vary.
Okay. Thank you.
I'm going to follow up on that one before I take any other comments. Suzanne, there is a section in here talking about, you should suggest to me that you anticipated this question, that somebody may have a colony in their property for a short time. I think it's something like 30 days was talked about, or maybe I'm imagining that. Was that intended to cover emergency situations like this? I'm looking under...
I read the ordinance too, and I believe they're talking about putting nuke boxes out for an emergency situation.
Right.
Nuke boxes are approximately 4 frames. They're about 1/4 the size of a full hive. And that would do okay for ailing bees that are diminished in quantity greatly. that would sustain them for a little while. But I'm saying if we picked up something that needed to be tended for maybe the summer or maybe longer than 30 days because it's so small, it would be helpful if we had a place that we could put them before we send them out into the cold, cruel world to get killed, basically. Because when they're that small, they're fairly defenseless against other bees.
So Suzanne, other than as an emergency situation for this 30-day period contemplated in the ordinance, essentially the city's response would be, well, then you ought to have it, that swarm or that ailing colony picked up by somebody with a larger property, more capacity?
Right.
Okay. Other questions? Nora?
I had a question, I guess, when it goes back to colonies and hives. Historically, or perhaps it's European, the term skep, a bee skep, are those used still? They seem to be woven, I think.
Skeps are a straw. You've seen them. It's a trademark of Utah. And they were made out of straw. And in Europe, when they first started with formal beekeeping, the castles and the walls around them had niches in the walls to put skeps, because they never heard of removable frames and that type of thing. And it's kind of interesting, when there's time to harvest, they kill the bees with sulfur smoke. And then also in the ancient wars, when the knights rode up with all their armor on, they threw these skeps off at them. So the armor didn't mean a thing. But skeps in the United States are generally illegal. At one time, in the state of Colorado, we had to have licenses to keep bees, and we had regular inspectors that came around. They were terrific people. They've since decided to spend the money on something else. There's no such thing anymore as inspectors. Does that answer your question, sir?
Just one more thing, and I guess my understanding is that that's not used in the United States.
No, it's
the
illegal in the
professionals.
U.S.
So it is still illegal then?
That's correct.
Okay.
Because you can't take the frames out and inspect them.
Got it.
Under this regulation, proposed regulation, under colony densities, I guess the question that I have is, it says here a quarter of an acre or less in size will have 2 colonies, and yet I heard Joe talk about possibly having 4. Is that something that you are in agreement with, that a quarter of an acre or less should have, or could have, up to 4 colonies, and using that as a basis?
I have a quarter of an acre where I am, and I could easily sustain 4 hives there. The sustainability of a hive is dependent on what kind of forage is around. If you put 4 hives on a quarter of an acre, an eighth of an acre, 10 acres, doesn't matter, and there's no forage for them, the bees will die. So it has to be an area where there's flowers or something for them to get food from. And so depending on where you are, and beekeepers know this, believe me, they know what forage is out there. I bet you most of our beekeepers could rival a number of horticulturists as far as knowing what the plants are that are growing and what their bees can forage from. If there are plenty of plants around, many bees can survive on a very, very tiny parcel of land, because they don't just stay there. They have a 3 to 5 mile flying radius from their hive. So it doesn't matter. You could say, okay, your home is here, stay here, and they're going to go where they're going to go, just like a feral colony will. And so depending on forage, actually that would probably depend on how many hives you're going to put in a given area.
The latest Bee Journal had an article about a guy that kept bees on a penthouse roof in New York City.
And I believe that. I guess I'm just trying to understand, or try to figure a way where this particular ordinance, the way it sits right now, as a proposal, encompasses virtually the entire city. And I guess I was trying to figure out, one, the way to figure out the most appropriate places to have the hives or colonies versus basing it on square footage of land. And that's what I'm still contemplating as I'm talking to you now.
Beekeepers are going to know, because they're not going to put their hive in their backyard if there's not going to be food for their bees. There's no point in it. We actually have to feed our bees sugar syrup, and it's 5 pounds of sugar in 1 gallon of syrup once a week if we're going to feed our bees. And you can imagine the expense involved in that if you have a number of colonies. So beekeepers aren't idiots. We know what bees forage on, and we're not going to put them in a backyard if they don't have enough food. If it looks like we're backing up against open space and there's all kinds of wild mint and perhaps sweet clovers and so forth out there, then fine. You could put 10 hives in there as far as I'm concerned, and as long as they can eat, you're good to go. But that same yard, not backing up against an open space, maybe everybody's xeriscape, there's lawn, and there's nothing for them to forage, beekeepers aren't even going to bother to put their hives back there. They won't want them there. They'll want to take them out to Hudson, where Jerry has his bees out there, and put them on an irrigated alfalfa field. So our main objective is for the bees to survive, the bees to be happy, the bees to be healthy, the bees to have food to eat, and to not be sick.
One other question, along the same lines, if you can follow my train of thought. Are all of the current hives or colonies on private land?
May I answer that?
Go for it.
Every old cottonwood along the Highland Canal is hollow, and there are all types and kinds of feral colonies in those.
I'm not talking about feral colonies. I'm just talking about...
No. The answer is no.
Oh, but I'm trying to be specific.
And the reason I know that, because Hudson Gardens, I don't assume is private property. It's a public place. They have beehives that the public can walk right up to and lift the lid off of if they want to. It's not fenced off. It's not anything. The same way with the Chatfield Arboretum. It actually has an electric fence around it to protect it from bears and stuff, but if people wanted to, they could walk right up to the beehives and look in. The Historic Museum, same way. They've got it in a little garden. People could hop the fence and step over and go in there. I know that South Platte Park is interested in having some colonies there, and they're going to use them for educational purposes. So, no, not all bee colonies or beehives are on private property. A number of them are in public places, and in fact, the Denver Zoo is, as of next week, will have 2 beehives out there as well. And so it's not as though we're fencing them off, hiding them from the public or anything. The only reason they'd hide them from the public is because the public will turn the beekeepers in for keeping in a place they're not supposed to.
Littleton High School also.
Littleton High School has beehives.
Julio, are you trying to get at the question if some private beekeepers keep their bees on, off their property?
I'm just trying to figure out the industry of the bees and how people deal with them. And I'm trying to get a better understanding, because this regulation, again, as I say, as proposed, is, if you will, limited to the zoning categories as proposed, and that doesn't include in our discussion some public areas as well, and I don't know how Suzanne's going to deal with that, but that's another issue. But from what I'm looking at, this is this regulation is limiting to some degree to just the zoning categories. And some of the zoning categories that even she's talking about extend beyond what we have designated here, which are still in the city of Littleton. So I don't know. I'm throwing that out as something that the attorney is going to have to figure out on. And how she does that,
We'd
it's up to
love
her.
to see it wide open. We would love to see a beehive in every backyard, in every public place, and every rooftop in the city.
Well, and you made a good case, as far as I'm concerned, on the item A here, where it says a quarter or less lot in size is limited to 2 colonies. And I'd like to see slash hives, because if they're equal, I want to make sure that's understood. Because when I certainly read this the first time, now this is about the third or fourth time because I've gone to the amendment, I still did not get the understanding or that connection based upon this regulation. And since I know nothing about bees, I think that'd be helpful for somebody else too that doesn't know very much about it. I don't have an issue with a quarter of a lot or greater or less going all the way up, starts at 4 colonies rather than at 2 colonies, from my standpoint. That's just me talking. But, it's something I would consider as part of anybody's motion that gets there. And in a way, that would also cover the emergency situation without having to expand upon another definition that somebody can trip over. That way, if you already start with a 4, you could have 2 where you have, or 3 that are existing, you could have 1 extra one for an emergency, et cetera.
It sounds like we're really getting into 2 questions here. One technical from the standpoint of beekeeping. And it sounds like what you're saying is the number of hives isn't necessarily going to create a space problem.
Correct.
It's not like you double the number of hives, you're going to have to really expand the space. Presumably there is some separation required, especially as you say when you're trying to rebuild a particular colony. Is that safe assumption? I've stated that right? Suzanne, Julio's point is, if this is focused primarily at private property and that sort of thing, where does that leave Hudson Gardens, Littleton Museum?
There's 2, I'm sorry. I know the museum is zoned R1.
That's good to know.
Okay. The park, South Platte Park, is zoned A1. Now Hudson Gardens is zoned PDC to allow the gardens, and I doubt, I'd have to get the PD plan out to look and see if it says anything about bees, but I doubt it does.
But it may reference any uses allowed in a A1 or something like that. So we would look back at the PD plan and see if it allows.
And that would be my recommendation, to cover the properties where these are, and this extends more than some of the zoning categories you
Well,
have
this
here.
covers A1, it covers,
The one zone I didn't put in there because it's not in our table, it's a separate in Chapter 2, is the OS district, which is public. We have public land that's zoned OS. In
Correct.
fact, all OS is public land. So I need to maybe address that in there.
but otherwise they should be covered in the PD plan as an allowed. I mean, the PD is really where you run into the problems, because if it's not allowed on the PD plan,
It's not allowed.
it's not allowed.
I know.
And so the PD has to reference back to certain uses that we've identified here, or it's not going to be allowed anyway.
Correct. And I understand that part, but I was just trying to cover some of these publicly held, either by the city or by the South Suburban or somebody else.
Yeah,
Schools, like you mentioned,
Well,
that also get thrown into that.
the schools are probably most likely, because I just went through all that, checking all the zoning on our computer file. All the schools are usually in the residential zone district, so they'll be in the R1 or R2 district.
Well, you have a better overview than I do, and so that's why I'm bringing it up.
So before we would rashly just rush into amending this list of zoning to include PDC or OS, are there any considerations we ought to be looking at, talking about?
No, I wouldn't include PD,
Okay.
because if you include PD, then it's confusing, because the PD plans don't allow it. The PD plan is either going to have to reference back to one of these allowed zones, or it's not going to be allowed in a PD. I mean, the
Any
PD,
new PD could have it on there,
Right.
but nothing that's already in existence.
We got a bazillion different PD plans out there, and they're all the specific zoning for that property. And we have, like, over here at Centennial Downs, that PD plan actually refers to, instead of listing out permitted uses for the commercial area, it references all uses allowed in B1 and B2. So there you go.
Yeah.
And then, I know there's some residential PDs out there that have addressed accessory uses as referring back to what's allowed in the code. And then we've got a boatload of PDs out there that are very specific about the uses listed, and you can't really mess with those just by changing something in here, because that
Well,
requires
I
an
think
actual
it's-
amendment to the PD plan itself.
And I think it's appropriate that somewhere along the line, even maybe in this code, that there's we recognize the limitation factors of saying that, even though that it would not address the planned developments that do not specifically either cite an existing straight zone category or are solely independent.
Yeah, we can do it in the staff report.
I was going to say, if the planning commission does recommend this on for
Right.
city council approval or consideration, it could be with the suggestion that staff reconsider situations like that. I'd hate to think that we, by an action tonight, would be telling Hudson Gardens that, gee, you're no longer legal because we got detailed and specific with the zoning categories. So that would be an
I don't think
appropriate...
Hudson Gardens would fall into that category, so I'm not worried about it.
Okay.
But I am worried about the ones that, that went through a specific plan development and didn't have the specificity of that time, and doesn't make any reference to a straight zoning category, which wouldn't encompass this, and they would not be allowed. And that's just the way it goes. They could always amend their PD if somebody was in dire straits, I assume, but, there are limitations to nothing's perfect. But this is getting close to about 90% there rather than 100% because you can't change some of the laws that are already in place. That's all I'm trying to do, is cover the boundary.
Linda, did you have something you wanted to say? Sorry. Carlos?
So it's my understanding that for all practical purposes, if the zoning or if this ordinance is approved as it's currently listed, beekeeping will be permitted in everything but existing PD plants and multifamily dwellings.
Excuse me,
Well-
what does PD stand for?
Plan development,
Thank you.
or if it's PUD, it's planned unit development.
Yeah, as long as they meet the, the setbacks and that sort of thing.
Could you explain the rationale behind not permitting it in multifamily dwellings?
Well, we just didn't want any confusion over what's a tract and who owns it, and somebody putting it out in what is really a shared common area and coming back and claiming this is a half-acre tract, and we all have, it depends how the HOA papers are written up. If they all have joint ownership in that, we could have somebody come in and say, I'm a joint owner in this tract of land behind my townhome, and I'm allowed to put up a beehive there, and that's not. We don't think that's an appropriate allowance in a high-density residential.
I'm not trying to get technical, but I'm trying to think of all the things that could happen. If any of these zoning categories, specifically the residential, there's a good number of places that either have HOAs or some type of deed restriction. How would this complicate it for an HOA that, if they're silent, it's okay. I don't think that'd be an issue. And if there's no deed restrictions. Let's say for some reason somebody had thought ahead and say, I'm not going to see any kind of I don't like bees, and they got it through and whatever, and some HOA in the city doesn't have a liking to bees, where would that put this code, or where would they be put in with this code?
Well, the HOA, that's a private contract between the homeowner and the HOA, and if you chose to buy a home with that restriction, this doesn't then allow you to do it.
So they can be more specific and be restrictive.
Yeah, we
that's
aren't going to prosecute it, so
Right.
the difference is that's a civil issue,
Correct.
and this is something that we're legislating. So if you chose to ignore your HOA rule, the city couldn't come in and do something about it, but you also wouldn't be protected by the city ordinance in your contractual dispute with your HOA.
Okay, thank you.
Suzanne, I know you got this largely from Aurora, so this may be asking you a question you don't know the answer to. Would you say that the number of colonies per quarter acre, half acre river was more directed toward limitation of the density of bees in a particular area more than a question of bee management and that sort of thing?
It really had to do with the what's an appropriate use in a higher density residential. And, I think in Aurora we understood the educational component, but there were a number of people who also had concerns about the ordinance, and so this was a compromise between those kinds of homeowners that had concerns about beekeeping, versus how Aurora felt about the advantages of beekeeping.
I hesitate to use the A word, but I'm going to use it anyway. Was there a degree of arbitrariness to 2 hives, 3 hives, 2 colonies, 3 colonies, or 4 colonies? Was there any kind of technical reasoning behind that, or was it just trying to find a reasonable balance?
I cannot remember. I know I can't remember whether this was suggested by them, by the beekeeper organizations, or whether it was a compromise reached by the council.
I can tell you that Denver basically adopted fairly similar to the Aurora ordinance. And at their city council meeting, there wasn't one person to speak against the bees there. However, there were about 50 beekeepers there and children there, and nobody objected.
Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, I've already spoken.
Yeah, just a few questions. One is the ordinance as it's written now addresses setbacks and densities, but I don't see anything in here about height. So my understanding then it would be subject to accessory structure height requirements. And I guess my question to the community would be, is that adequate? I don't know what heights these hives are normally installed at.
If we got a lot of rain, we get flowers, we get honey, and I've seen them with 6 feet tall. But that's strictly until September, and then you cut it down to this high.
That's only if you're lucky.
Yeah.
Nobody around here has been that lucky for years.
So there's no concern about having to exceed the height requirement for the accessory structure?
I'd follow up with that and ask a question. I think typically the hives are on the ground, but I have seen some up on, flat roof structures and that sort of thing. Is that common? Are there any technical arguments for or against that?
If there are predators, like skunks or raccoons, or maybe your house is on an ant pile or something, you might want to put them up off the ground. But 99% of all beehives that I am aware of they don't set flat on the ground because it's not good for the hive and it'll warp it and it's too cold. So we usually put them up like on a cinder block or a nicely made stand or something like that. But the stands are only about this high off the ground. And so typically they're on the ground.
So the 6-foot flyway fence and all that would still tend to restrict the approach and departure of the bee.
Right.
Okay.
Can I just talk about the 6-foot fence a little bit?
I'm Liz Wickard. I live at 991 South Yarrow Street in Lakewood, Colorado. But I used to live in Englewood where they allow hobby hives. And my hive was in my backyard. We had fences that were about yay high, so 3.5 feet. And I never had a 6-foot structure for my bees to fly over. All the yards were fenced with the same height of a fence. One neighbor had chain link on one side, and then we had wood on the other 2 sides. My neighbors were really excited when the bees came, and really upset when I moved and took them out of the yard. They found much greater yields in their garden and their fruit trees and things like that. In the 8 years that my hive was in the backyard, none of my neighbors were stung. None of their children were stung. I had 2 cats and a dog that were loose in the backyard. Other than the dog who tried to eat bees once in a while, nobody got stung. So I understand the 6-foot restriction, the fences that you want to put those in, but I can tell you bees can be kept in a backyard with very low fences and really have no issues.
Craig, you had more than one question.
Yeah, just one other, and it's somewhat minor. And F, maintenance, on the second page of the ordinance here, the language I don't really understand. It says no bee comb or other materials that might encourage robbing are left upon the grounds of the apiary site. I assume that means theft. Is there something of value there?
Yeah, it means theft. don't let any beekeepers stealing our equipment.
Okay, so that's...
It's bees robbing bees. If you leave honeycomb sitting out, the bees will come rob the honey out of it, and it won't necessarily be your own bees. It could be bees from other areas. So, and it would also encourage raccoons and skunks and things to come into the yard. So that's why they say don't leave the honey.
It's not bees coming into the backyard and stealing parts of the hive?
It's not.
Okay.
It's not. I believe that when they said robbing, they meant mostly bees robbing honey.
Go ahead.
I have one other question. Those of you that are here are obviously very either beekeepers or very interested. And I guess my only, and you're making a very appropriate, presentation of why we should do this, and I don't have any, and I'm not trying to be a naysayer, but I guess I'm curious about, and it was discussed earlier in the presentation of how you have to have some education, you just can't go out and do this. You obviously know how to manage your bees, or vice versa, I don't know how that works, but anyway, the point being is that, but if somebody is not a good beekeeper, I don't know how to deal with that part of it. In other words, we don't have a bee police, we don't, I don't anticipate that to occur. So I guess, for those of you that are into it and know what you're doing, I don't have a real issue with. It's the other folks that maybe don't know anything and are going to try it for a week and then all of a sudden,
Not at the expense that goes into setting up a hive. You better be darn sure you know what you're doing. You're spending over $200 for a hive and maybe up to $200 for a package of bees to go in them. So a bad beekeeper is not going to be a beekeeper for long. Either the bees are going to die or they're going to be real sorry and selling their equipment soon. But no beekeeper, not one of them that I know of, would go into this lightly. There's too much involved. There's too much equipment involved, too much expense involved. And if they're in it for the love of the bees. And they're not going to neglect their bees. They put out way too much effort and money to get them where they are.
And the risk of a well-intentioned amateur going out into the beekeeping business and harvesting a hornet's nest instead, that'll be self-regulating, presumably? Problems?
In terms of accessory structure, it seems to me that when we're talking, the average hive is smaller than the average dog shed. Would that be accurate? Okay. And the other thing, which I think was question was addressing a little bit, was what percentage of beekeepers are known to each other?
All of them, pretty much.
So if I were to put bees in my home and my neighbor wanted to put bees in my home, because then the total amount of bees that we have together may be in excess of what the ecosystem can sustain, that's probably going to be figured out through private processes.
Yep.
Okay. Again, it falls into the
We are
nature.
very well.
Okay. One suggestion that I would have, and I don't know if robbing is the only term, but there is under 10.4.14a definitions, but maybe we can add the word robbing, or the definition of that in there, precisely because that word has different common meaning, and I think that misperception. And if there's any other vocabulary in there that needs to be specifically defined, I think that it may be to the benefit of everyone. We don't want code enforcement to all of a sudden have to become fluent in beekeeping vocabulary beyond what's in the ordinance.
Steve?
I would agree with that. I've got the question, are all honeybees, are they part of a colony, or are there any ones that are off on their own that aren't?
Honeybees are colony-oriented insects. However, there are many different kinds of bees. There's bumblebees, there's mason bees, there's leaf-cutting bees. And bumblebees
bees are more solitary bees. They live in the ground. They're not colony-oriented. So there are many types of bees. The types of bees that we are asking for are colony-oriented bees. They're called Apis mellifera, and there are a variety of species of them, but all honeybees are colony.
Okay. Other questions from the commissioners? Would the commissioners agree to open this up for public comment? Assuming there's someone in the audience who'd like to speak, to elaborate on what we've already heard, or, hard to believe, speak against it?
I'd just like to address Commissioner Aturia.
Good luck.
Thank you. About the beekeepers. As far as beekeepers go, I have never met a beekeeper that hasn't at least read a book or taken a class or apprenticed with another beekeeper to learn the skill of beekeeping. So when you were asking about somebody just picking up and taking, trying beekeeping on a whim like that, I've never met anybody who's ever done that, to be honest with you. And Joe and I have apprenticed a lot of beekeepers. We teach beekeeping classes. So there's a lot of opportunity out there for people. There's Northern Colorado Beekeeping Association teaches classes every year. So there's a lot of places for people to learn.
I guess as a follow-up, if this ordinance gets approved or amended and approved, I would recommend that your group get on the website for Littleton so that, because it will be a new, if it is established, that they have access to get to you all for greater discussion.
We have a website. If you want a link.
I was just thinking that a link would be, well, if it gets approved, I think that would be very appropriate, because if it does generate more people interested in becoming beekeepers, why would they have to hunt harder to find it if we've already created a law for it? It seems like a pretty logical connection.
It also might reduce the amount of staff time required to answer questions about what bees and beekeeping expanding in Littleton is going to mean. So, anybody else in the audience, if you could get up and say your name and your address.
Wayne Duffy. I'm Wayne Duffy. I live at 4552 Lake Drive. I'm here with my wife Pam. We've been residents here for 31 years. Been in the same house for 18 years. We have an acre. We're both master gardeners who volunteer with the Extension Service. And we can tell you that we have seen a decline in the bee population, a significant decline. And that's the reason, and by the way, I'm the criminal that has been apprehended for putting in the 2 hives that started all this. I was thinking that it was okay because all the other surrounding cities. Anyway, we did it first for pollination. You mentioned about the honey. That's a great byproduct. That's not why we're doing it. We're doing it because we have 37 fruit trees. We've got a huge garden. We do organic gardening. We really enjoy it. And we've seen that bee population when we first moved there was significantly higher. Now, in the recent years, we've seen that decline go down. Yields have gone down, and we want to have that pollination that's so well needed here. So, speak to that issue.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, it's not really a public hearing, so I'm not going to pull it to a close. Other comments or questions, discussion among the commissioners?
Can I summarize some of the things that we talked about?
Sure.
One thing is if this is approved, we recommend linking their website to the city's website. We want to add some definitions. We want to look at adding OS to the zoning requirements. And one thing I've heard is that we would like to change on page 3, H1A or HLA, the 1/4 acre or less in lot size from 2 colonies to 4 colonies. And then one thing Julio mentioned was changing the language for anytime you see the colony densities, to have slash hives attached to that.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that last one?
Like, for example, on page 2 where it says colony densities, have a slash hives added to that. And I don't know if there's any kind of legal issues involved with that. So that's what I was hearing in our meeting.
I would only add one other thing, and I think it's appropriate that since we're a number of us, at least around this room, that I don't know if there's any planning commission members that are beekeepers, but it would be nice to have that the hive in the definition where we talk about the structure, that we all create some kind of a dimensional pattern that's approximately 2 feet by 1.5 by 3 feet, so that there is some generality of what we're talking about. Yes, sir.
Just call it a standard lime straw hive.
Well, the problem with that, though, is not everybody has your background. And I'm trying to get to the folks that don't have the same educational background that you do in this, and they might put in parentheses exactly what you just said, but I'm trying to keep it to something that anybody who picks this up for the first time and may not have any experiences whatsoever, that will have an understanding of what we're talking about, rather than somebody making a determination that they don't know and going off the handle and really getting upset with everybody around here for why we even created such an
We
ordinance.
can provide you with the dimensions of the standard hive, but there's also another hive called a top bar hive that's used almost strictly for pollination. And it has different dimensions. It's longer and lower. It's about this tall and it's about this long.
You know,
And those can be all different dimensions as well.
I guess, again, I'm gonna say, I would like to see something that has some type of dimensions to it for the folks that don't understand what you all are doing and how you're doing it, and not to take away from your prescribed terminology or anything, but I'm trying to make this a little bit more universal.
We can provide those.
If you could do that in a timely fashion to
Tomorrow, or you like tomorrow
our city
morning?
attorney, like tomorrow.
If you look right on your email, we will get that to you by tomorrow.
And I think that's where we're coming from,
One
yeah.
suggestion might be to solve that problem, is to just say a maximum cubic feet. And then that way, us accounting.
I really don't care. I'm going to let you guys, who are the experts, figure that out. I'm trying to figure out something that somebody who's either in code enforcement or somebody gets thrown into the situation, all they're going to see is this. They're not, chances are they won't have anything more than this, and they're going to have to make an assumption based upon this documentation. So I want to be specific enough so it transcends what we're trying to do here to somebody else tomorrow.
So it makes it easy for anybody reading the ordinance or looking on your website, much less somebody trying to enforce it, to know what it is they're looking at and what the requirements or expectations are.
We'll measure a hive tonight, and if you give us your email, we'll email it to you this evening.
And I actually like the suggestion of a not to exceed, because like you've discussed, sometimes you add a little bit on top. And again, the idea behind this is to make it clear. We know that all the beekeepers will understand the terminology, but neighbors that may have an issue complaint, or somebody in the city that gets called in, or code enforcement, I think that is as much for the protection of the beekeepers to make sure that the law is clear, and that there can be no misinterpretation of what you meant and what we approved by somebody 10 years down the line.
I know that Joe and I would both be happy to meet with your code enforcement people and take them to a bee yard and let them see what the hive looks like and things like that too, so they can be familiar.
And that works. The only thing I know is that every now and then people change and they don't stay in the same position. So it's an ongoing thing. And I guess that's one of the reasons why I wanted to have your website at least linked, so that even our code enforcement officers could get a hold of you in the future, or anybody for that matter. For all I know, it could be the police department or God knows who. But the point is that there's some level of accessible communication.
Future elucidation helps, but tonight we need to get the ordinance clarified as we recommend to pass it on, assuming we pass it on to city council. I think that's what we're trying to get here.
And the last thing is that 3 feet is without honey supers. When Jerry,
Boxes that collect honey.
right, during the summer, we put honey supers on, and that hive could go to 6 feet tall with honey supers on it. They're only there usually from May to September.
So we're going back to the cubic foot thing, and I think that might be a better way to go.
No. Okay. Do I hear a motion from the commission? Linda, you started summarizing some of the issues we talked about as possible recommendations of other considerations or elaborations on the ordinance. Would you care to turn that into a motion?
Just a clarification, should we have a motion?
That's what I'm asking.
For as is and then introduce amendments?
We can, whoever offers the motion can move however they want, either to adopt it as presented in the staff report or adopt as presented in the staff report with the following clarifications or amendments.
I would suggest that I will move that we recommend to council the adoption of this ordinance that we received and leaving it open to the commissioners to amend it, because I've got a number. But just to get started, I think dealing with these details by amendment is probably the way to go.
Okay, so that's out of the door first, and Pavlos has seconded. So now we can have discussion.
And just for clarification, we won't send them an amended ordinance. We'll send them this ordinance with your recommendation.
In which case, Pavlos and Norm's approach was the right way to do it.
So we'll just listen.
I tried to get these in order, so perhaps if I start with the First Amendment, which is to add OS in the zone district list under the second whereas. OS was one of the suggestions I think Julio came up with.
Actually, it was based on a discussion that Jan
I was just
offered.
just clarifying it. Actually, the OS isn't in the table, so I'd have to actually put a different type of wording in there to add it into the section in here that covers OS. That's sort of it's just want to make it more general. I know what you mean, yeah.
So, I would second that.
So we're going to go through these individually?
Yeah.
That's good.
I think that's the best way.
Cleaner.
Call for the question.
Can we really amend it before we've really voted on the motion? Yes.
Well,
It's a recommendation in any case.
It's a recommendation. You can do anything you want.
So the recommendation to pass along with the ordinance that's presented is that we add OS to the list of zoning categories. All those in favor, raise your right hand. We don't have the, thanks, Joe. Okay, I see 7 hands in the air. Okay, accepted.
The second one I had is based on what we heard here tonight, is under section 10-4-14 definitions, number 2, bee shall mean any adult stage of the common domestic honeybee, and so on.
I'd second that.
So moved.
All those in favor, hand up. Thank you, 7-0.
All right. Under definitions, again, same section, add a definition of robbing, whatever the next letter would be, or number would be number 7, to define robbing.
I'll second that one.
Discussion? All those in favor? Okay. Next?
I was going to pause for just a moment. I've got.
Sorry, Maria.
Can I just add one thing? Now, this lady, you're going to send me a definition on robbing, is that correct?
Very good.
I'll pause if you need to catch up.
That's okay.
Can you cut in for one more definitional item?
Certainly.
Under 5 for hive, I'd like to put in the dimensions in cubic feet. as an addition to the existing definition.
How will we come up, will they supply the definition?
They're going to supply the definition.
They're going to supply that.
I'll second that.
If we supply the dimensions, can you turn it into cubic feet?
Well, I do have a math background, so I probably can figure that out.
He's pretty smart. So I don't have any worries about that part.
Somewhere in the building, somebody will have the math skills. Maybe we'll have a student group on.
Jan's good at this.
That's good.
Discussion, all those in favor, aye?
Aye.
Okay.
I have one question, and I know you're going to go on with your motion, but I don't know which one of you ladies said it, but you gave out the scientific name for the actual bee.
It's in your.
It's in the definition.
Yeah.
It's the very last line of the very first page.
Well, no wonder I couldn't figure out how to read it, much less. Thank you.
You're in a roll.
Okay, you're on the roll.
Well, I had one more that I've managed to jot down, and I'm not sure how we want to deal with this. I think Linda mentioned changing from 2 colonies to 4, and I will propose that, and subject to discussion, I was going to add the word permanent colonies, because there seems to be some sense of rehabilitation, strengthening of colonies that may then perhaps, I don't know, be sold or transferred. So I was going to add the word permanent somewhere. This is section, where are we? Still 10-4-14.
H-A, right?
Right, H.
A and H.
And then, portion A, this is, well, the pages aren't numbered either.
H1A.
Yes, thank you. So I'm suggesting the amendment that we change it to 4 permanent colonies.
Second?
I'll second.
Quick question. Suzanne, does the word permanent create problems that we don't really want to get into? I mean, I'm not sure what permanent means.
Yeah.
The entire season, 12 months, forever?
And I don't know the lifespan of a colony. Clearly, it's not in
I
perpetuity.
mean, are you
I
saying
guess.
you can have as many temporary colonies as you want on an
That's
eighth
what I'm
of an
getting
acre?
at.
I mean, that's the problem.
Yeah.
Are you saying you can have an eighth of an acre and you can have 4 permanent and 8 temporary colonies?
Well, this was in regards under 1/4 acre or
Right, but
less.
this
Right,
is
okay.
less,
Or
so
less.
you're talking about a high-density residential, you could have 4 permanent colonies and how many, an unlimited number of temporary colonies?
What we're trying to address with the ordinance is density, presumably, of bees, whether they're there for 30 days or, 6 months or 6 years. It's still the number of colonies on a given piece of property, size of property.
I think we'd have to define temporary, and that creates, then code enforcement's going to have to go out, and are they going to put like a little GPS on? I mean, how are you going to know which was the temporary and which was the permanent? And
By increasing it to 4, we at least have expanded the opportunity for somebody doing, right, rescues, rather.
May I
I mean,
suggest?
even established, how is code enforcement going to know that?
How about in totality?
May I suggest that we simply, because the way that I had it was that we strike H1A, okay, and H1B is changed to
Less than
one half of an acre lot size or less, 4 colonies.
Then the appropriate
Renumbering.
I'll second that. Well, we already have a motion on the floor,
Yeah, so we have to kill those.
That's fine.
unless the...
You're going to withdraw?
Well, perhaps. One other suggestion that I've made a note about was also moving down to the number 2 and changing the 30 days to 90 days, which would accommodate most of a summer. I'm just kind of working through this as to what's workable. So I will withdraw my motion and we
Once
can
you
move
second
forward.
it, you agree to withdraw?
I
your
agree
motion?
to withdraw.
Okay. Would you like to restate that?
The alternative that I saw to the word permanent was moving down into section 2, where we, in the last sentence, where we deal with nucleus colony. Although I'm a bit unclear as to whether that is covers all of the colonies, perhaps, that are feral, understrength, and so on and so forth. So maybe that doesn't accommodate it. I'm lost in the terminology.
I like Pavlos' way of going at the same
All we need then is a motion. It can come
Okay,
from
so
the-
I move that we strike H1A and reword H1B to state that 1/2 acre or less lot size dash 4 colonies, and then the appropriate renumbering.
I'll second that.
Okay. Further discussion? All those in favor? Aye. We're done. Okay. Norm, you want to follow up with H2?
No.
I did again.
I guess I believe that took care of it.
Yes.
And I hadn't, that was all the things jotted down. I don't know if it covered everything that came up.
I have one item that is, that was missed. I like to add 2 colonies, whether or not it's 4 or 6 or 8, that we say colony/hives.
Everywhere it says colony?
Yeah, because they're both one and the same, according to what I've just
Well, then why don't we just redefine colony, or just take out the definition of hive?
I just made a motion on the hive definition, because we created dimensional aspect. The problem that I saw is that on the definition as a standalone, they both mean different things, and yet, as in reality, when they're combined, they're one.
It's 1 for 1.
It's 1 for 1. So I guess I want to try to maintain that relationship, and the only place I thought I could put it was where the A through D are now.
Or we could accommodate that in definitions. A colony is taken, a hive is taken to represent one colony and vice versa, accomplish the same purpose.
I don't know if it does, because I thought it was very interesting that a hive meant the structure versus the colony meant the equipment and appurtenances, including the bees, et cetera. And so I kind of read that, and I didn't, and I've heard the term hive and colony for many, many years, but if somebody was to put me on the spot and ask me for a definition, there's no way I could have given one that would have come close to this.
So we already have colony defined separately from hive.
Correct.
We're going to expand the definition of hive to encompass the idea of volume. So really all you're saying is we've now accepted the idea that colony and hive in terms of counts are interchangeable.
Correct.
You just want to correct that in the language. in the
Correct.
body
I
of
just
the
want to
ordinance.
add hives to where it says colony on the A through what is now going to be E or
Okay.
D.
Do we have a second so we can talk about it further?
On these,
Okay.
just
On this, my understanding was, when I asked specifically about the question, is that a hive is the structure, a colony is a populated structure. So as such, if the issue is to control the number of bees that are any given property, then we need to regulate the number of colonies. That while a colony includes a hive does not necessarily include a colony. As such, I would prefer that the language stays as it is, because if for whatever reason a person has a 5th hive, given that they're expensive equipment, people will not be having them hanging around just for the fun of it. But if for whatever reason a person has a 5th hive that is not occupied at the time being because of transition or anything. I can't see any reason why someone may want to do that, but I also can't see any reason why we would want to regulate that.
So Suzanne, we're really trying to regulate colonies, the numbers of bees, not necessarily standby hives. I mean, most beekeepers I've seen have standby hives. All hives are not necessarily filled. So we're really trying to limit the number of active colonies.
Right.
Right.
So you could
So I
have,
understand what Pablo's is saying about.
so you could have 10 hives on your property
And still be in compliance with this regulation.
So Ernie had to stick his hand into the hive to make sure that there's nothing in there.
He doesn't do that stuff anymore.
I'll let you guys figure that out. I don't really care.
I guess I would leave it as it's written under, right after the definitions under bee hive, it says all bee colonies shall be kept in hives with removable combs, and talks about the condition of it a little bit. And if we add hives/colonies, to me it gets a little confused after a while. I think that's...
See, and I just went the other way. I thought that if you had colonies and you're trying to number the number of bees, and who in the heck's going to count the number of bees? Does that mean that you have one queen per colony, or do you have, now there's no reference to how many queens you are per colony.
I think it says one.
Well, I understand that, but humans, we're dealing with humans. I'm not worried about the bee part of this. I'm worried about the human part of this.
Any other discussion on?
It seems to me that it would just clarify it slightly if under A5, where it says hive, definition of hive, I mean a structure intended for the housing of one bee colony instead of a bee colony. Same thing, but maybe...
Are they single bee colonies? But technically, that's a reasonable assumption to make?
Yeah. You can't mix colonies and stuff.
Thank you for being a lot smarter than I am to figure that out.
Cutting to the chase. Any other discussion on the amendment in front of us? Which if we would do the colony/hive, we'd then be regulating the number of structures rather than colonies. So to vote in favor of this proposed amendment would be to change to regulate structures, not colonies.
As well as colonies.
Well, it would be to change it to regulate hives. By de facto, that might be regulated colonies. But we would then, for example, enforcement would have to say, you're only allowed 4 hives, not necessarily 4 colony-occupied hives. Okay, let me try and recap this again. If you vote for the amendment...
Don't do that. Just forget about it. By the time you figure it out, it'll be another hour. It's confusing as it is.
Can we withdraw the motion?
Sure, I'll withdraw it.
Pablo's going to
Second, do you consent to withdrawing?
Yes.
Well, that was an easy way. This was
Now, an amendment to add the word one under the hive definition then?
Second.
Okay.
Okay, we don't have to discuss that. That's fairly simple and straightforward. Thank you, Craig. All those in favor, aye. Hands up, thank you. Also passed. Other amendments. Linda, did we miss anything from your hit list? It looks like we've covered it. Other than the website links, can we need to take that as part of the recommended ordinance, or can we just pass that along?
And call the question on the main recommendation.
Okay. Hearing no dissent? Okay, the motion is to recommend the ordinance as presented to the City Council with our recommendations for amendments as iterated previously. I count 6. All those in favor, raise your hand. 7-0. I'm sure that your email will be burning up tonight, Jan. The patience and determination to sit through this meeting. Thank you very much.
I would
I'd like to recommend, Joe, when you come in for the meeting with the council, I would recommend maybe bringing some pictures showing what the hives look like and kind of giving them more of a, kind of giving them more of a
Picture being
basis.
worth
Bring a hive, not a colony.
hours of work.
Call it an apiary.
Thank you.
As we get through this. Okay, following the agenda, we're going to be talking about long-range planning for a comp plan update and a study session to follow this regular meeting. Next item on the agenda for the regular meeting is reports. Staff, Dennis, anything that you, Suzanne, Jen, or Doreen have? Okay, liaisons, BIAC. Linda?
BIAC held its first meeting with new members appointed by City Council last Friday, April 24th. The committee elected Michael Price as the chair again for his second year, and Susan Thornton as vice chair. The biggest change this year is BIAC no longer has a specific charge from the City Council to write a report. They will serve as an advisory capacity to Chris Gibbons' department as originally intended by the city charter. Hold on, let me pass this out. And Mr. Gibbons, during this meeting, him and his team, they led the meeting by presenting the city's economic gardening program. And he had mentioned that the economic gardening program of the city provides the following services, and I kind of wanted to just give you guys an idea of what it is that they do. They have GIS services, including mapping, competition, and identifying potential markets. They do customized research. They do website optimization. They have listings of available space and vacant land. They critique advertising programs. They will review your business plans. They'll provide lifestyle data and psychographics. They have capabilities of doing drive time analysis. They have customer lists, including SRDS, direct marketing lists. They also have access to Lexis, Nexus, and Dialog searches, as well as access to 10 commercial databases. They also are able to search any information from the county assessor's real estate records. And they also have government lists, including licensed professionals. And finally, the city will underwrite the first $150 to obtain marketing lists from Seco Financial. So that's kind of just a quick summary of some of the services that they offer.
You also walk dogs?
We could ask. So that's just an idea of the kinds of services they provide. So any questions?
Okay. Historic Preservation Board?
Yes. Held their meeting Monday, April 20th. The current chair and co-chair, Chair Pro Tem, William Hopping in the first and Pam Rosendahl in the second, were approved unanimously again. They had a discussion with the city attorney regarding changes to the code. Talk a little bit about ongoing training. They have been working on a review of umbrellas for the patio down in front of the Carnegie Library. They had some pictures and, after much discussion, approved unanimously the proposal as currently submitted. There's a few that will, how should I describe this? They're cantilevered to cover a single table. Most of them are large enough to cover two individual tables. There was discussion about the viewscape, the edge profile of the umbrellas is relatively narrow, thus obscuring less of the facade of the building. They've been working. they've been working on this for quite a while, and these are, of course, not permanent. If they would have had them deployed as I had mine overnight, obviously heavy wet snow is not good for umbrellas. But it's a seasonal type of thing. Basically, the sense of it in historic preservation is if it's not permanent, it's allowable. It's not a permanent change to the structure or the facade or something like that. That was, let's see, I think that's about the size of it. There was a little bit of discussion, and I think they're going to nominate the Chambers Farm, the buildings up on Bowles there, just north of Bowles on the other side of Platte Canyon, as one of the most endangered most endangered places that Colorado Preservation Incorporated lists each year. They're going to start working on that proposal to nominate that. It's, if you've driven past there, in the state of deterioration, and there seemed to be some indication that there's difficulty in communicating with whoever it is that owns that. The city owns the property around that area. If there's any other questions, I'd refer you to their minutes or their notes, or I can try to answer questions.
Any questions of the commissioners for either Linda or Norm? Any issues, comments, or otherwise to be presented by individual commissioners? Greg, we'll start with you.
No, thank you.
Douglas, Linda, Steve, Julio, Norm?
Nothing else.
In the interest of time, I have nothing either.
I'll move we adjourn to a study session.
Okay.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
We're adjourned. Can I suggest we take about a 5-minute maximum break before we get into... Bob, I know you've been waiting patiently, and I appreciate that, but we could just take 5 minutes, so be back here before 10 up. Oh, if you're going to step out of the room, you might want to take your microphones off.
you could write it up, kind of summarize, and then send it to me, and I'll file all those, that'd be great. Kurt gave me, some quick analysis, and I've got kind of the same thing for mine, kind of the key points, I think. And it sounds like Norm's going to do too, so key points that what we heard. So. And they all vary. Pretty dramatic is what I can find. Some people get into great detail. But good information, good perspectives, I think.
It's very similar in nature to leafcutter ants, but these guys roll it up in a tube and fly with it. It's neat. They're fun to watch. They're also very agreeable.
Me too, and I'm going to call back again and see.
Can we sit down and get this thing started so we get out here
Steve found some people who hadn't gotten them, but I think they just they went to their office, and I think it's got lost in the file, probably, so.
That's easy.
Yeah, we need some extras. You bet. Great.
Okay, so after a brief comfort break, I'll call the study session for Littleton Planning Commission to order on April 27th. Primarily, one topic on the agenda, and that's getting our preliminary results, raw numbers back from the conflict update questionnaire.
Do you have your quick look reports, Andy? Okay. These are not preliminary. These are bottom line broken out totals of the 1,412 questionnaires. We're still getting some, but it's not. But at some point, of course, it becomes necessary to say this is it and let's get on with the analysis. In fact, we have a few over 1,500, but I can't keep adding a few more and get the very final report finished, which will have some additional information about how people of given ages and genders, whether they own or rent their homes and so forth, feel about it, where they may differ somewhat from the collective opinions of the 1,400. I will say that a little bit of a caveat here. Any mail survey will fail to be a representative sampling in terms of being a microcosm of the actual population, demographically wise, of the universe at hand. However, this one was strayed away from the demographic profiles as presented by the census, updated to 2008, considerably. For example, we had an age group of 18 to 25, which basically is the voting age minimum bracket. The census shows that there should, in 20 to 24 instead of 18, there should have been 6.2%, but there was 1%. I mean, and that gives me a problem. We do have the ability to have a run with weightings, in other words, but I have a real problem with letting a 1% elements become 6%, and when in fact you know that that's liable the 1% is liable to be way off the mark to begin with. The 20 to 24 was also way out of kilter, way low. The 30 to 35 was somewhat low. Actually, it was a 25 to 35. The 35 to 44 was about on the money. The 45 to 54 was reasonably close. The 55 to 64 was overrepresented, almost 2 to 1. And then 65 and older, it was more than 2 to 1. So, and that makes a difference only when there's a rather substantial difference of opinion among those groups. And that didn't happen too often, as a matter of fact. So I don't believe that the grand total unweighted is going to be all that much different, but I don't know yet. There could be several examples in which adjustments must be made, but I wouldn't say that's a major problem. The one that was really out of kilter was male female. I was reporting to Dennis as they were coming in early, and they were in almost perfect balance for about the first 200. And then it went wildly out of tolerance, and we ended up 2-to-1, the ladies versus the men. I guess it was kind of unusual, and in the context of male surveys that we've done, they were self-selected in the past, but it is what it is.
And how different were the responses there? You said there weren't, the differences between the age groups weren't terribly significant. Were they significantly different between the male and female?
And of course that explains part of it, because there are a lot more ladies that are over 60 than there are men, and that does explain part of it. But we do a lot of telephone surveys involving voter registration lists, and very seldom is there a spread of more than 52% women and 48% men. Hardly ever does it get any farther off than that. But on the other hand, we may not be contacting all that many on the telephone either. So I just thought I'd throw that caveat in.
Bob, did you see different answers between the men and the women? Are they significantly different?
No, they wasn't. They didn't tend to be dramatically different.
Oh.
But we will see the results, not only overall presentation, but breakdown by the different demographics as well. So we can see any.
We deal in what we call demographic anomalies. We point out cases in which there's a difference that's worth talking about.
Rather than swamping us with repetitive numbers that don't vary significantly.
That's right. Exactly. Excuse me. And going through has everybody had a chance to read this quick look report?
Yes.
This will be the point of departure for the final report that's in the works. If you have any questions about those, that'll speed it up a little bit, I guess, rather than having me assuming you can't read and reading it for you. So, fire away if you...
My observations, since everybody's somewhat quiet, it appears to me that there's I'm kind of surprised from my perspective that on page 1, question 2, most frequent responses were parking complaints. Yeah. That was 30%. And then you go to the number 14, and it talks about enough parking, and there's a no with 55%. And I guess I'm somewhat befuddled by the response, because every time I go downtown, and be it either for dinner or lunch or whatever, I guess I would like to know, well, what I was going to say is when I go down, I don't have a problem, but I usually go on the weekends. But saying that, I guess I'm curious to know if there's a relationship between the parking complaints and number 14 to enough parking to And where did I see it?
Number 2.
4 and 5. I think you're looking at that.
Yeah, where you have, well, on number 5, it says every week or so is 41%. So I'm wondering if you're getting your greatest complaints about the parking, if it's from that group that's going there every week or so, and what does that mean? Versus every month or daily, and then you have the weekends versus, I thought it was interesting that you have evenings are 22 and weekday afternoons are 20, and yet weekends are 28. And yet my own experience when I go down on a weekend is I don't have an issue.
I would.
And that's just my dumb experience.
We can find out by doing a cross-tabulation.
I would like to see some cross-tabulation between questions 2, 4, 5, and 14. I think because parking is such a big issue, I mean, it gets brought up all the time. I think a cross-tabulation between 2, and maybe actually 2, 3, 4, 5, and 14. Because 3 says what's the main reason for going downtown. And I'd like to know if the person, that 55% who says there's not enough parking downtown, do they predominantly go to restaurants? Is there an equal, and if we look at the 55% that says not enough parking downtown, that 55%, does it answer questions 2, 3,
So crosstab in order to try and tell us when are they perceiving this problem, what is it?
and who is it? It would be very interesting if you have a person, if I'm going to completely exaggerate, the numbers will never come out like that, but let's say 100% of the people who said that there is not enough parking downtown go to downtown only on weekends and only to go to restaurants and bars. That gives us an idea of there's enough parking downtown, when, and for what function.
To complicate that even more, do you want to know their age and gender? I mean, if there's a distinction there. So.
And the other side of this is, once we get those answered, then we can take that questioning of parking to the open house and literally talk to people as they're walking in the door and saying, these are what we have, now you tell us. Because I think we need to get some balance, if there is a balance, or if it's going to be just off-center, we need to know that as well.
How much writing did you get, or how much additional information did you get of these answers? Because I've heard just in talking to people say, well, I think there's a parking problem because I have to parallel park. I don't like to do that. I think there's a parking problem because...
Well, there you go.
I can't park right in front of
whatever it might be.
But then I think about what would they do if they had an angle park?
Right, yeah. That's true.
Well, and that's the problem.
Yeah, but the point being, we're trying to get a definition of, is there a problem, yes or no, isn't enough. It's when is there a problem, on what basis is there a problem?
And I guess I will throw out, parallel parking to me is not a problem. That's not equating to what I think is an issue of parking spaces. And maybe that's where the clarification needs to come in. I don't know.
You think parallel parking is a problem here, try and do it over an angle when you're trying to drive from the
Well, we'll get those several cross-tabulations of 14 versus the others.
I think the cross-tabulation in terms of gender might be interesting simply because there's a gender imbalance, but a more interesting cross-tabulation may be in larger age groups. A younger person may not mind a little bit of a longer distance. An older person may really want to be closer. And as such, I see age as potentially varying the perception. I really don't think that a man or woman will gender will necessarily perceive parking.
To some degree, that information may help us get to a solution too, because if it's parallel parking, if it's distance, adding a parking structure or adding additional parking 2 blocks away is not going to help necessarily.
That's the issue.
And if we go in and we have certain things and we realize that maybe it will help us or help City Council, that provide some guidance. If we need to get to finer granulation, then what kind of questions do we need to be asking that this does not answer? That way, there could be maybe a second survey that happens at a later time that focuses exclusively on parking if we or city council decides to have a parking issue again.
That kind of crosstab reference could give us some specifics to focus on at the open house, what to explore, what to really press people for. Okay.
I did find it interesting that 30% say that parking is what they like least about downtown, but 55% felt that there's not enough parking.
Well, yeah,
Which means that 25% of that 25%, almost half of the people who felt there wasn't enough parking downtown did not consider that to be their biggest dislike that they had about downtown. Because that also measures a little bit oh no, I don't think there's enough parking, but doesn't bother me as much.
That's the difference between a multi-candidate election and a runoff with the top two candidates too.
well, there are different kinds of questions. It's an apples and oranges comparison, so numbers don't really, comparative percentages don't tell you too much, I don't think.
No, I think it says a little bit about maybe the intensity, because someone may say, oh, I don't think there's enough parking downtown, but I'm not really bothered by it. Versus someone says, I don't think there's enough parking downtown, and that's one reason why, the primary reason why I avoid going downtown.
Well, the 30% is a better indicator of the problem by far.
I think of the intensity of the problem.
Yes, because it was competing with all of these others, plus some 1, 2, 3 percentage points that don't show up.
Right, so they might say, yeah, there's a parking problem in parentheses because I can't park really close to where I want to go. On the other hand, I'm more concerned about the number of stores closing, lack of variety, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And maybe that's something that we can also try to query at the open house and other things about the intensity of that problem, because there's a certain point in which we make some recommendations we have to balance. If you have a whole bunch of people who consider that, if you're asked there isn't enough parking, but it's not that big of a deal, then to what extent does it make sense for the city to invest in huge infrastructure in improving parking if it's not a huge deal, versus people saying, oh no, there isn't enough parking and I don't go downtown because of it.
I think my way of dealing with exactly what you're talking about is maybe a little bit different, and I guess I would recommend for the open house that we have certain criteria for parking. I'm interested in, using the same question, but are we dealing with parking spaces? And I think somebody else brought it up, and I agree. Or the type of spaces. Is it parallel parking, or is it being able to park in front of your designation, like was stated? I would like to know the differences, because like you said, if we do a parking structure and it's 2 blocks away, that sucker's empty forever, and it costs us, $5 million to do it.
Block hoping for a spot to open in front of
Right, and then they're still saying, I've got a problem with parking spaces, or, and I guess I would like to know that issue primarily because there's such a gap between parking complaints and what I saw in enough parking in the downtown. And I think that's something we just need to it's kind of a mystery to me. I'm curious to see where that really lies.
Well, it also has to do with short-term. I remember last year, and I think it was during our retreat, where we were discussing this whole thing, is the issue between, if I'm popping in and out of the store for 10 minutes, I really don't want to park 2 blocks away.
Oh, that's the flag eye waiver discussion.
Yeah, so, but if I'm going to go for a couple, I'm going to go shopping and then I'm going to go eating, then it's okay for me to park 2 blocks away because I'm going to be in the area for a lot longer.
But it's funny because I got that same kind of comment from a couple of business owners expressing that idea. Yeah, we know that some people are going to be in and out in 15 minutes, want to park close. Somebody's going to be with us for an hour and a half, 2 hours. They have to walk a couple blocks, big deal.
And that problem may be solved by creating, available, free or very inexpensive long-term parking that's a little bit off-site, and having the metered parking that is right in front to be more tightly regulated and make it for shorter zones.
Cross-tabbing those kind of questions to try and begin to give us a shape of the problem, then helps us hone in on the discussion of the open house, try and pick at that, try and either reinforce or dispel.
That's why I wanted to cross-tab also with number 3, because it gives us a little bit of an idea of when 3 and 4 and 5 tells us when they're going and what they're going for.
Bob, is there a way of cross-tabulating that many different questions and showing up something meaningful, or you're going to have to do it in smaller groups to tell us anything significant?
No, I mean, it's fully feasible. It's just a matter of time, really.
Otherwise, on the demographic questions, you think if you just focus on the anomalies, that'll tell us what we're looking for as far as, is it a particular age group that has, I don't know why we keep focusing on parking, but for the sake of argument, a particular age group that thinks parking's a problem, a particular age group or sex or whatever, or owner versus renter that thinks, that goes downtown for particular reasons. We're really looking for anomalies rather than just a general distribution. I'm not stating that very well. I'm trying to find something, some hooks that can grab our attention so that we get the open house. We know where to poke, to pick, and get more information.
The question I've got too is, at what point do we take it the next step and say, okay, if you think there's a problem, what's the value of that? What's the weight of that compared to the cost of providing parking? You're willing to pay the additional cost, the cost of losing, store space, along the street, or
I don't think we have enough data to even.
As long as we don't get perception out there that the information we get gives us the final solution, because I think there's so many other parameters that we may actually.
All we're going to get is the piece in the survey that says we need to ask more questions about this.
The cross-tabulation for me will help us narrow down, what we need to get more specific at. We know that the open house is also going to be not particularly representative in terms of the sample universe. But hopefully out of all this, we can go in with present some information internally as well as to council and say, look, here's some of the trends that we're seeing, and here's all the unanswered questions. What we don't know now is short-term versus long-term parking issues. But we asked those questions a little bit at the open house, and here's some tantalizing information that we got.
We're back to feeling the end.
The open house will be another self-selected sampling.
Exactly.
Now, it might be useful if to the extent that people will do it, when you're going to have to sign in, aren't you?
Yes.
To get their age. And just see how far off it is.
Well, that's interesting.
Especially if they're all women coming in. Yeah, good luck.
They're certainly going to write down their age.
You try that.
Yeah.
I'm not going to ask you that.
No, but get it, age.
We'll let Bob do it. He doesn't look like a guy that's
Observe the gender,
There you go. Break it into
Bob, I'd like to see the correlation with number 17, people considering living downtown,
yes or no?
and the ages. Which 17 and number 21.
Yeah.
I'd like to see how that worked out.
I think I've already got that one.
And then possibly working in the 20 with it also.
I think I've already got that one.
Okay.
Those are really just demographic tabulations, which we do have in hand now. It's when you cross an issue question with an issue question that we don't have at this point, and we have to supplement it.
Yeah, because I was just thinking that 43% was pretty high on people wanting, thinking about living down there at some time. Thought the 43 was pretty high, and trying to figure out the age range.
That jumped out at me also. I think it was 2% lived down there, and 43% would consider living down there. Yet the number that think that we need more, which question was that? That we need more housing downtown is very low also. So the conclusion seems to be that we don't live there now. We would like to someday, but what you have is adequate for everybody.
Well, except as Bob pointed out, that was a smorgasbord question where they had to prioritize. They may not necessarily, it may be more than 8% think that you need more housing. They just didn't necessarily think that was a higher priority than some of the other items.
And some of them were looking at things like assisted living, in existing, where there's quite a bit of turnover. And also, sometimes they gave us gratuitous comments, and sometimes their idea of downtown wasn't the same as yours. Kind of far-ranging in some cases, but still in all, though, I do think that 54% is worth thinking about. I really do. And again, what do they want to do? I hate to start opening up new avenues of crosstabs, but what do the people who say yes do when they go downtown? I don't know.
Well, I think it may be interesting also to see all the people who say they want to live downtown someday, that 43%. I would be interested in seeing how many of them, what percentage of that does not live in the city. In page 9, in question 19, you've got answers 7 and 8, right? I own a business in Littleton, but live somewhere else, and I don't live in the city.
Well,
so I would like to live downtown I would like to move to Littleton, or I would like to relocate from somewhere in the city to downtown.
There were very few of those, very few.
As opposed to somebody living in Littleton and they go downtown more frequently, and therefore they're more interested in living downtown than somebody that goes down there once a month.
Yeah, it'd be nice to have a full evaluation of those people who are interested in living downtown at some point, and see how they answered all of them.
I'm not sure we're going to have sufficient elaboration on that information even before the open house to go into the open house with any cut and dry conclusions. And I think there's a danger if we take these at face value and start drawing assumptions that need to be fleshed out with supplemental detail, we may be cutting off conversation. And I don't think that's what we're intending.
I think there's some general, I don't think we will come up with any kind of detail, information about, but I think it gives us some indication. Okay, right. I mean, if is the majority for us overrepresented as the older age group is in this, if we found out that actually once you take the younger age groups, they had a much higher percentage that did not want to, or that did want to live down. And some trends that just kind of shows.
Would you like the answer to that?
Yeah.
And 18 to 24 is, I'm not even going to talk about them. There were only 9 of them out of 1,400.
Okay.
But 25 to 34 is the yeses were 58%. And it actually sloped off from there as they got older.
Really?
Okay.
Yes, 25 to 34 was the maximum incidence of yes.
So if anything,
what were the other percentages?
The other ones, 35 to 44, were 54. 45, 35 to 44 were 54. 55 to 64 was 44, and 65 or older was 28.
What was the 45 to 54?
That was 54. There are two 54s right in a row there.
So it's actually up until 54, the majority wants to get to 54 older. So actually, as we get into the retired, assisted living, senior housing
Be
category.
nice. Just be nice, buddy.
Don't want to maintain beehives.
Beware of what you say.
No, because that was the question was asked, is it that more people are moving in because they want the senior housing or the assisted living?
But that still leaves unanswered the question of what kind of housing, how close to downtown, what amenities do they want, which doesn't help anybody as far as.
No, it doesn't, but it does make it interesting to see that if we could deduce that if the answers were more representative across the age category, it's possible that that 54 to 43 may have been reversed.
And one thing we didn't ask was about family studies with children. So we wouldn't have any way of interpreting whether they're looking for.
There were many things we didn't
Well,
ask.
yeah, but I'm saying in terms of type of housing, the age group or whatever, people interested in living downtown, that's a whole area that we haven't explored. So what we're going to have to do is look through both the raw data and Bob's eventual presentation.
I wouldn't have wanted to add any more questions.
I know. Well, we're going to have to look for the kind of questions that we didn't get from the survey, and we might try and explore a little bit at the open house.
Yeah.
Do you have right there the counts on the different age ranges on how many of each? You said there was 9 of the 18 to 24?
Yeah, the 25 to 34 was 103. Yeah, that's significant. 35 to 44 was 175, which is going to pull it down, you know. 45 to 54 was 317. And believe me, incredibly coincidentally, 55 to 64 was also 317. You don't see that very often. And 65 and older was 485, which of course I mentioned earlier was quite a skew. They're greatly overrepresented.
Can I just ask, many of you are writing these numbers down, whatever you're reading from, could that be reproduced for the board members?
What?
Just whatever you've got there looks to be maybe a couple dozen pages. Could that be distributed?
He's going to present.
Okay, very good. I guess if we can.
Well, he'll be able to reproduce it for you.
Okay, I was going to say.
Actually, I don't believe he does it.
We've narrowed in on a couple little pieces.
Kind of like Jim Woods taking down the beehives. Did you read that?
Kind of raw data. Before it gets the final report, if that can actually be emailed to us.
Let's see.
Well, email would be okay, or
distributed from the city by the city manager.
And then we can print out.
That'd be kind of fun to watch that happen.
I think all of us are very curious, and if we start to look at that, different areas will jump out, rather than questioning him about one of these and then, just kind of doing this. The more unfiltered data, I guess, that we get might be more interesting.
You know what I find interesting? If the people on number 14 that said no and are 55%, and yet we could figure out what age group they're in, that'll give us a tip off of whether or not they want to walk or not walk.
I plan to do that.
So that'll be really good.
But if you had basically that kind of raw data, you could go back and forth.
Eventually we will, and I think that's good.
You're the parking czar from this point forward.
So will we have the detailed report, Bob, before our Saturday session? No. And we wouldn't have time, given the agenda for the Saturday session, talk about anyway. Unfortunately, that doesn't give us any time as a group to go through the information and talk together about it.
But I wouldn't really worry about that. That's why I was saying that if we just keep it simple for the open house, and we talk about the issue of parking and spaces and parallel versus not, that may not mean it very much to anybody else, but at least will give us a trigger of what we're dealing with.
Because I think we want to limit the number of issues we really raise at the open house to
I totally
a fairly
agree with
small
you.
number.
Oh, yeah, and I don't
Those
because
out.
you clutter too much out there, and then
You're gonna
it'll be like a planning commission meeting, and we'll be all confused.
You're going to have boards, aren't you, probably? Yeah, I honestly believe that virtually everything that you would want on a public meeting like that on boards doesn't get into the crosstabs.
Yeah, I agree.
Can I ask you another question on question 15? And I don't think that that's an issue that we necessarily need to bring at the open house. But I'm looking at this, and it has the highest non-response ratio of all of them. And this is the friendly to bicyclist questions. Can you give me a rough idea of how the non-response and the yeses correlate with age?
Yeah.
Given that we have a older demographic that the dominant answer that, I'm curious as to whether the age may have made that a less relevant question.
It does.
To
It does. And the answer, I think, friendly to bicyclists.
Question 15.
Yeah. What doesn't, I don't have, the no response factor is 33%.
33, I have 22 here.
22.
22, yeah.
Unless you're looking at some age bracket.
No, that's right, yeah.
So what's the no response rate on the 65-year-old?
What you're really asking, is there a blip someplace in the age where
Is there an
big
age
difference in one
correlation?
particular age?
Well, I think based upon the information you just gave us, knowing that 65 and greater represents 1/3 of literally the entire group, I think that's pretty substantial.
Well, that's a kind of natural assumption. I want to see if the data.
Oh, I know, but he may or
answer-
may not have it tonight.
The answer is 65 or older is, no response is 35%.
Let's use it.
What's the no response ratio of, say, the 25 to 30?
Now, if you look at the 25 to 34, which is enough people to talk about, the no response is 7%.
Okay, so, and
also,
between those groups, we can see a natural, as the age group gets younger, the response ratio goes higher.
well, I was surprised when I looked at the friendly to bicyclists, yes, that the 25-34 said 50% said yes.
Okay, so we're not going to get much more than this broad data to have at our fingertips or to prepare us for the open house, which means we have to do what we said we need to do.
Well,
ask more questions, do more listening instead of preaching or selling a position. Once we do get your report, Bob, I presume we will have time to go through it, and statistical anomalies or questions like Pavlos has suggested, we'll still have time. If they aren't apparent in the report, we can still go back and ask you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, for example, friendly to pedestrians. That one is almost straight line across. Virtually everybody was within 1% or 2% of the 85%.
So that's age neutral. That response is
Right,
age
straight
neutral,
across.
while the friendly to bicyclists is very age dependent.
Almost
That's good to know.
Almost a straight line.
And I think it's very interesting to see that the 87% say it is friendly to pedestrians. It's nice to know it's across the board. And on question 11, we're looking at a lot of people, I mean, the vast majority put it as very important to report.
Any other pointed questions for Bob? Given that we'll have another round of this is just the highlights or lowlights.
Oh, we can go on for another 2
I know.
hours.
Well, maybe let's do that. 60 seconds, I think.
At least you could, I don't know about me.
Okay, anything else we need to talk about before we do have a Saturday session all day? Well-fed, I'm sure.
Well-fed, and what we're going to do is I'm going to change the agenda around quite a bit, drop some of the stuff we're talking about so we have more time to prepare for the open house. So probably we'll have almost all the afternoon, if not all the afternoon, to prepare for open house. Get our questions live there.
Okay, so try and pull the rest of the stuff into the morning session.
Well, yeah, and drop some stuff.
Are we still having the jam stuff? Since we won't have the report, and that's a question for both entities, is it possible that we could have just the raw data, what you have over there, emailed to us?
Or ready for distribution Saturday anyway? You want to have a look at it
before, because that may help me come up with some suggestions or questions.
and spend less time on it Saturday.
I don't think I can email it because it's not a word-based data, statistical package.
Not Excel either?
You can't export it as an Excel?
No. Sometimes it works, but usually it doesn't. So I'd rather just have it mailed to you.
Okay. Well, whatever you can get us, Bob, that would help us if we're going to spend a little time on it.
And maybe it is.
Instead of wandering all over the board.
If we're gonna have it printed, maybe show hands of how many people actually want it to be put down. So I would.
I would really like it.
Did you get that, Dennis? Sure. Okay, anything else before we adjourn? Saturday's gonna be a long day.
I move that we adjourn.
Second?
There's something else.
All those in favor say